There are names that men speak aloud, and there are names that only slip out through clenched teeth when night falls and the conscience begins to bleed. Nemesis belonged to the latter kind. She did not arrive with thunder tearing across the sky, nor with armies marching upon walls. Her presence was cruel. It came in the silence after victory, in the empty gaze of the crowned king, in the laughter that died before reaching the lips. Where there was excess, she breathed. Where there was pride, she waited. Where a mortal deemed themselves greater than the gods, Nemesis began to weave their downfall with invisible fingers. Many believed that divine punishment was immediate, brutal, dazzling. They were mistaken. The vengeance of Nemesis matured like poison kept in a golden cup. She did not punish only crimes. She punished imbalances. She punished beauty that humiliated, wealth that trampled, glory that forgot its own fragility. A hero could defeat monsters. A king could conquer cities. A queen could bathe in praise. But if their hearts leaned too far towards pride, Nemesis would lift her gaze. And when she looked, fate changed direction. Narcissus discovered this before his own reflection. Kings discovered it in the dust of their palaces. Warriors discovered it when their swords weighed heavy as guilt in their hands. Nemesis did not need to shout. The whole world would bow to carry out her sentence. This is the story of the goddess who did not forgive arrogance, the dark justice that turned pride into ruin. In Greek mythology, Nemesis was not just a goddess of vengeance. She was something older, colder, and more frightening, the force that returned to the world what pride tried to steal. The Greeks feared hubris, excessive arrogance, that sickness of the soul which made kings, heroes, and mortals believe they could surpass the limits set by the gods. And when that arrogance grew too great, when man forgot he was made of flesh, shadow, and death, Nemesis would appear. She did not represent impulsive anger. Her punishment was measured, patient, and weighty. It was like a dark set of scales, slowly tipping until it crushed those who had gone too far. In some traditions, she was the daughter of the night. In others, the daughter of the ocean, but in all she bore the same fate, to watch over human excesses. Nemesis did not pursue only murderers or traitors. She hunted the vain, the arrogant, the untouchable, those who smiled at the suffering of others. Before we continue this dark journey, subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and let me know in the comments which city and state you're watching from. I want to know where this story is reaching. Perhaps Sao Paulo, Minas Gerais, Bahia, Paraná, Rio de Janeiro, Ceará, or some quiet corner of Brazil. Because old stories never die. They simply travel through the centuries, searching for new ears to remind of a forgotten truth. No throne is too high, no face too beautiful, no name too great when Nemesis decides to collect. Before she was feared as vengeance, Nemesis was understood as balance. Not a peaceful, delicate, or radiant balance, but a stern order that demanded payment when someone crossed the line. The Greeks believed that the universe possessed invisible measures. Each man had his share of glory, beauty, power, and fortune. To desire more than what was allotted by one's own fate was to invite destruction. This excess had a dreadful name, Hubris. It was not just pride, it was an insult against the divine order. It was the moment when a mortal looked up to the sky and believed himself above it. Nemesis was born at precisely that instant, not as a warrior advancing across an open field, but as a shadow behind the banquet, waiting for the wine to go to the heads of the arrogant. Her justice was different from the justice of the courts. It did not depend on witnesses, decrees, or judges. She saw what no one would confess. A man could deceive the city, could buy priests, could erase traces of blood, but he could not hide from Nemesis the weight of his own excess. In a symbolic hand, a set of scales often appeared, not to weigh coins but souls, not to measure innocence but excess. She was also associated with the wheel, a sign that fortune turns. Those who tread on others today may wake up tomorrow beneath the rubble of their own name. That is why her presence haunted the powerful. The higher someone climbed, the closer they came to her gaze. Nemesis did not hate greatness. What she destroyed was greatness corrupted by arrogance. Among all the sins that attracted Nemesis, vanity held a special place. Beauty, when mixed with disdain, became a blade pointed at one's own chest. So it was with Narcissus, the young man so handsome that he made hearts collapse in silence. Nymphs, maidens, and men admired him as if gazing upon a living statue. But Narcissus loved no one but his own superiority. Every adoring glance he received was treated like dust. Every plea was crushed by his indifference. Among those who suffered because of him was Echo, the nymph condemned to repeat only the last words of others. She loved Narcissus, but received only disdain in return. Echo's pain rose to the heavens like bitter smoke. And Nemesis heard. The goddess did not descend with a sword, did not send any beast, nor did she open the earth beneath the young man's feet. His punishment was more refined, more intimate, more cruel. She led Narcissus to a spring of clear waters. There he saw his own face reflected and was captivated by the image he had always adored without realizing it. He fell in love with himself. He longed to touch that impossible reflection. He suffered for a beauty he could not possess, even though it was his own. The one who scorned others became a prisoner of his own charm. He who had rejected all loves died consumed by an empty love. Nemesis did not need to stain her hands. It was enough to deliver Narcissus to the mirror of his own soul. The arrogance of kings has always been more dangerous than the vanity of youth, because a proud king drags entire peoples into the abyss. In ancient Greece, rulers were reminded that their crown did not make them gods. The throne raised the body, but it freed no one from death. Even so, many kings became intoxicated with power. They heard too many applauses, received too many bows, commanded too many armies. Little by little, they stopped listening to their own humanity. Nemesis watched these palaces as one observes a tree rotten from within. On the outside, marble, gold, and music. On the inside, termites of pride devouring everything. When a king humiliated the weak, when he believed his will was a law above divine law, the wheel began to turn. Punishment could come in the form of a lost war, a dead heir, a ruined harvest, palace betrayal, or madness growing behind the eyes. The punishment of Nemesis was terrible because it seemed to arise from the culprit's own choices. She didn't need to invent ruin. She merely allowed arrogance to finish its work. The king who ignored advice ended up surrounded by flatterers. The king who crushed his subjects ended up feared but never loved. The king who thought himself eternal built his own tomb with decrees. Thus Nemesis taught a bitter truth. Power without limits is a noose around the neck. The higher the throne, the longer the fall when the goddess decides to pull the ground away. The most frightening aspect to Nemesis was her patience. She did not act according to the time of men who wished to see swift punishments and immediate tears. The goddess knew the value awaiting. She knew that certain downfalls need to ripen in order to wound more deeply. She knew that some arrogant people must first believe they have won. This delay confused mortals. They looked at the unjust prospering and wondered where justice was. They saw cruel men laughing at banquets and thought the gods had closed their eyes. But Nemesis did not sleep. She merely waited for the moment when the culprit's own victory would turn into a trap. Her justice came like winter after a stolen harvest. Slow, inevitable, seeping through the cracks until it froze the heart. Sometimes her punishment was external: loss, defeat, illness, exile, public shame. Other times it was internal: paranoia, emptiness, remorse, an inability to feel peace. This was a most subtle cruelty, making the guilty carry within themselves the court, the executioner, and the sentence. Nemesis did not only destroy bodies, she corroded certainties. She made the arrogant doubt their own reflection, their own luck, their own applause. When the goddess drew near, even wealth felt heavy. Even beauty seemed like a curse. Even glory smelt of the grave. A delay was not weakness, it was precision. As time went by, temples fell, cities changed their names, and ancient priests turned to dust. But Nemesis remained. Her name endured through the centuries because it touched a wound that never healed, the fear that every excess will one day be paid for. Even today, we call Nemesis that which pursues, confronts, or brings someone down. The word left the Greek temples and entered the language of everyday life. This happened because Nemesis never belonged solely to mythology. She represents the profound truth about the human condition. Every arrogant person believes they are the exception. Every unjust, powerful person believes they'll get away with it. Every cruel, vain person believes their beauty, fame, or position will serve as a shield. But history insists on showing the opposite. Empires fall, fortunes vanish, names once untouchable become whispered warnings. Nemesis endures because the world continues to produce men and women who overstep the mark, who mistake privilege for divinity, applause for eternity. She is the dark symbol, a consequence, not of empty revenge, but of the inevitable response to imbalance. Perhaps that's why her image still sends shivers down the spine, because everyone in some secret corner of the soul knows when they've gone too far. And when that fork creeps in the dark, the name of Nemesis seems to breathe behind the door. Nemesis was not the goddess of screams, but of returns. Everything that someone cast into the world with arrogance, contempt, and excess would come back by her hand. The arrogant would cast humiliation and receive shame. The vain would cast coldness and receive loneliness. The king would cast tyranny and receive a fall. Her justice had neither the warmth of mercy nor the desperation of human vengeance. It was older, drier, sharper. It was the certainty that the universe does not tolerate for long that which grows beyond measure. That is why the story of Nemesis remains powerful. It does not speak only of Greek gods, sacred springs, or forgotten kings. It speaks of anyone who, upon achieving something, begins to look down on those left behind. It speaks of that dangerous moment when beauty turns to cruelty, power turns to blindness, intelligence turns to mockery, and victory becomes a license to crush. Nemesis appears precisely at that point, when the soul leans towards excess and begins to rot from within, even while the world is still applauding on the outside. And perhaps that is the darkest lesson of all. No one needs to summon Nemesis to be found by her. All it takes is to go beyond the limit, to laugh at someone else's pain, to look at your own reflection, your own throne, your own name, and believe that nothing can ever fall. Then, at some invisible point in fate, the wheel begins to turn. The silence changes its weight, luck changes its face, and the goddess who turned arrogance into ruin takes her first step.